Hello, and welcome to Change the Face of Yoga, teaching toddlers through golden oldies. I'm very excited to be talking to lots of yoga teachers who will explain their passion for teaching yoga to students with different ages, physical fitness levels, wellness levels, and different goals. They will explain the benefits of yoga for these students and will be including teacher tips and pose modifications. I am Stephanie Cunningham of Yoga Lightness, and I've been teaching over 50s for 10 years. So this area is my passion and the passion of many other yoga teachers that you will be listening to in this series. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get started. This is episode 61 of Changing the Face of Yoga, and I'm interviewing Marsha Danzig, who has created and taught classes for amputees, as well as teacher training for people that want to teach amputees. So let's listen. Hello, this is Stephanie Cunningham with Changing the Face of Yoga. And I have a wonderful guest today, Marsha Danzig. And Marsha is the creator of Yoga for Amputees. And that has been voted one of the top 13 adaptive yoga programs by Do You Yoga. She is an advanced yoga therapist, an author and speaker with an international client base. She's the author of From the Roots, a candid memoir about choosing joy in the face of insurmountable obstacles, a childhood bone cancer survivor, kidney transplant recipient, and an amputee yoga teacher. She's been featured in Good Housekeeping, Yoga Journal, Huffington Post, and Oprah Magazine. And I love this. She's a passionate flamenco and ballet dancer. Marsha's mission is to show people how to find beauty in all circumstances. Welcome, Marsha. I'm very excited that you've said you'd come on the podcast. This is great.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about being here with you.
Oh, well, thank you. Is there anything I missed or anything you'd like to add?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I think, that's fine.
You have put together classes and yoga teacher training for amputees and for teachers that want to teach amputees.
Mm-hmm.
I will admit that I don't think I've ever had anything in any of my trainings that even came close to giving me any information or any help with this kind of special population. What kinds of things are you getting across to your teacher trainers or to your students in class that really support people that have had an amputation?
Well, number one is that every person is whole, and that yoga is a way to remember your wholeness. And for an amputee, that's often part of the biggest process in terms of physical and emotional recovery, is finding your way back to your wholeness, your sense of yourself. Some people do really well with that. Other people really struggle. And where they struggle a lot of times is with pain and with body image. They struggle with independence. So those are the big ones. And so yoga is a way to address each of those challenges that come along.
I've read your website and I've looked at some other things, and you do talk a lot about wholeness. I assume that is or could be quite an issue with someone who's had an amputation.
It is. I mean, if you imagine for yourself, one day you're driving your car and you have access to the gas pedal and the brake and the steering wheel, and then 2 weeks later, the doctor's telling you may never drive again because you're missing 3 limbs. How does a person find their way when, first of all, when we go out into public, there's not a day that goes by that we're not stared at in some way as amputees. Some of us are fine with it. Others of us are very uncomfortable with it. There's that aspect. And then there's also just the aspect of what if I can't walk anymore? What if I can't do the things that I could do before to have whatever kind of job I had? So our identity is so closely tied with our physical body that when a piece is actually cut off from it, that is really vital, like walking or grabbing, picking up a cup, opening a door, anything like that, it can make you feel like you're using up all your mental energy to just get through the day rather than be able to really thrive. It takes a lot of effort. So you can lose your sense of your normalcy, which is part of that wholeness.
You have been through a lot. I didn't realize that you'd had a kidney transplant, but you have an amazing ability to overcome those kinds of things, which must have been very difficult. And how much of that resilience, which apparently you have an abundance of, would you give to yoga? Would you say that yoga really helped?
Well, it's interesting because for me, the physical aspect of yoga was one of my first introductions to yoga, but it was almost as if I remembered the spiritual aspects of yoga within myself somehow the first time I did yoga, just the physical yoga practice, hatha yoga. And when I was little, the first time I had bone cancer, I had an experience of being given First Communion. And I just remember in my little mind, my 5-year-old mind, thinking, well, I'm eating God, so I think I'm going to be okay. And so that idea of yoga as yoking with the divine, yoking your individual self with this higher self, it's just for some reason always been with me. And there was actually a really anchored deep knowing of that. So any of the challenges that have come along, I feel like I've been a born yogi forever, and then the hatha practice came in my 20s, if that makes sense. I don't know how else to say it. There was an understanding that God is in every cell. I don't know how I knew that, but I just did.
Well, it's amazing, but it sounds like it's done a wonderful thing for you because you really are.
Yeah, I'm glad I did.
Yes.
Phew, worked out.
Tell me a little bit about how you started yoga for amputees. I'm making an assumption you started with classes, but that might be incorrect. So what was your journey there?
Yeah, it's interesting. I started teaching yoga 20 years ago, and I really, really wanted to teach, quote, normal classes to normal people, whatever that meant.
Okay.
So I think I was still not completely comfortable with being seen. There was still a part of me that energetically was hiding because, with yoga, you pretty much are barefoot. And my first prosthesis that I used for yoga was actually ripped apart by all the yoga practices, and I had Band-Aids all over it. People used to crack up that I was putting Band-Aids to do anything. But it was cheaper than getting a whole new prosthesis. Mm-hmm. But of course, the people that kept coming to me had physical challenges, emotional challenges. Then they would start asking me, my child has Asperger's, or my child is in a wheelchair, or my cousin has cerebral palsy. There was just somehow this confidence that they had that because I showed up with a disability of some kind, or in their minds a disability, that I might be able to help others with different challenges. So it started with children, and it started with children with different kinds of needs than your average everyday kids yoga class, for example. And then about 10 years into it, I got a call from Yoga Journal about my work as an amputee yoga teacher. And at the same time, I had been feeling this pull to really crystallize the work that I've been teaching all along, which was really adapting to a body with a prosthesis. So I ended up working with some yoga programs specifically that helped veterans, and in which case there's a lot of people with limb loss. And so it started out as a workshop, and it very quickly the demand came, is this a training? Can I get my hours and all of that? So I started a training out of that. It was just meeting the need that was already being asked of me, if that makes sense. But I wasn't expecting it.
You must have created this all by yourself. I mean, or were there...
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I'm impressed.
But like I said, I wasn't looking to do it, but I guess as I usually say with yoga, I have this uncanny ability to say yes to things that I wonder why I do. They're always right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Okay. I like that. Now your program has been voted as one of the top 13 adaptive yoga programs by Do You Yoga. First of all, what's Do You Yoga? Because I'm not familiar with that being in Australia.
Yeah, it's a website, and it's pretty big. I don't know what the following is, but they have yoga practices and articles and a large social media presence. I mean, I didn't know about it. Somebody actually forwarded it to me, and ended up, I guess it was a big deal within the yoga community. It was just good to see that accessible yoga, adaptive yoga, is being seen more as very viable and not just something on the fringes anymore, and that there's enough people out there, which is, I would say, most people actually need some kind of adaptive yoga anyway. So
there's certainly days when I do, yes.
Yeah, exactly. It could be related to age. I even think teaching children is adaptive yoga, which is what I did for years, and teaching people going through, I strangely also worked a lot with men going through midlife crises, and came to me for yoga therapy, and same thing. It's a very, it's adapting to your new life or your new experience of life.
Yoga's the one that's kind of taking the bumps out of the road, shall we say, for that adaptation.
Yep.
Oh, forget it. I can't say that this morning.
I know what it is, adaptation. Yep.
I love this quote that you gave me, which is, teaching yoga to amputees makes me feel reassured that I am not alone in my journey, and the only time I am stared at is when a fellow amputee wants to make sure I am one of us. So that's, I hadn't ever thought about it, but you're right. There probably is a lot of people staring and not even sometimes in a nasty way, just kind of like, oh, what is that,
Oh, yeah, curious. And there's actually a website now. I think it's for one of those design your own T-shirts just for amputees. And I sent this to my students because they're so funny. And one of them says $10, tell my story again.
It sounds like a good revenue generator.
Right?
Yeah.
Because, most of the time, if you have something like you're wearing an eye patch or something, people in life just can't help themselves. They want to know. But after a while, 50 years of it, it's kind of like, So now I think I'm going to get one that says, buy the book on Amazon, and here's the link.
Well, that's a good segue. So now we have a book.
Yeah. So From the Roots is a memoir. It's I would say more of a spiritual memoir, but moving through the body as a spiritual vehicle, if you will. And then the Yoga for Amputees book is now in the hands of the graphic designer, and then hoping that the publisher will take it. It might be too late for the fall, but maybe winter 2019. So it's really beautiful and it's really rich. I'm really proud of it. So.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. What is it? Pictures of amputees doing yoga, or is it more of this is how you teach, or for yourself?
Yeah, well, it's more of these are possible ways to teach because there's so many different kinds of amputees. It's pretty thorough. We talk about types of amputation, types of prosthetics, advances in prosthetics. Prosthetics are prosthetic limbs, arms, and legs that people wear often, not all the time, depending on their type of amputation. Then adapting to different themes of what it's like to be an amputee. Like I just mentioned, body image. There's a whole chapter on body image and sexuality in yoga. And then there's a chapter for clinicians and how to do a patient care plan for somebody who is missing a limb, and include yoga in the practice. So it's pretty thorough. It's a lot to think about. Yeah, below knee, above knee, arm amputees, double amputee, quadrilateral amputees, it's veterans, children, people with diabetes, heart disease. They're all different.
Oh, I'm sure they are. It sounds extremely complex.
Yeah. You just keep trying. Yeah. That's what we do.
Okay. Just keep trying and learning.
Yes, we do. And that's the best advice I always give. Because I do know a lot. I've been doing this a long time, 30 years. But my best approach so far reminds me of, what was that, Hogan's Heroes, where he says, I know nothing. I know nothing. So I try to think that way because it seems to help me, because then the client is going to tell me where they're at so that I can really listen best to them and what they need.
I teach seniors, and so I am a yoga teacher, but do you think that not being particularly knowledgeable about amputees, how would I make an amputee feel really comfortable in my class? Because obviously teaching seniors, I do a lot of modifications. That's not an issue, although I don't have any experience with amputees. But how would a run-of-the-mill average yoga teacher make sure that an amputee felt comfortable in their class?
Well, number one is you always, the way I look at it, you always teach to their wholeness, what their capabilities are. Even if a person is very self-critical about what they can't do, I'm not looking that way. I hear it, and I hate to say it, but I usually go, yeah, in my mind, because I've heard that a million times. But what I'm looking at is where they're really quite capable. And so you want to hold that up for the person, because most amputees that come into a yoga class want to feel whole. They want to feel normal. They want to be really healthy and active, and or reduce their stress or reduce their pain, whatever it might be. Just like anybody, somebody walks in who's a senior and has a lot of arthritic pain, they might be doing yoga because of that. That's number one. And then I tell all my students that take the training, you want to teach to the highest possibility, but at the lowest common denominator. So in other words, you want to assume that the person can do it, just like you would a kid. You know what I mean? A 10-year-old child in your class, that child is capable, and your belief in them really helps. And then know that they might be at a very, I call it gross motor skill level. So I want to make sure they understand the basics. And so that means always having props, always having a chair, always having a wall for amputees, because balance is one of the things they're always going to want to work on. And then showing the people as a group how to adapt using props. And then amputees have this incredible ability to invent and create, because every day is an adventure in creativity, because you don't know what terrain you're going to be on, and you just don't know what you're going to meet along the way. So I can tell you, for example, my flamenco performance, I have a prosthetic leg for a low heel, and it's got a lot of traction on it, so I don't slip, because I don't get the feedback from my foot. And the skirt is really long, and I could barely dance with it on a really well-worn dance floor. And then I got to the recital hall, and the floor was so slippery that I ended up standing a lot and just kind of moving my hands around, because I literally didn't want to hurt my limb. It was just really that scary for me. I did it, but if you see the video, it's kind of funny, because luckily I'm way in the back, but a lot of times I'm just kind of doing some fun finger things, because I would try to turn, but I couldn't really go all out. You know what I mean? Because again, my mind had to adapt to my surroundings. Luckily there was a wall that I leaned on for a second. So that's a big part of it, is just trusting that most amputees are already going to come up with ideas on their own and then look at you. That's why it's usually better. And I have a feeling with your senior classes, this is going to happen anyway, where it's not going to be a lot of subtle, deeper movements like you might do with a really advanced yoga practice where you try to get into one particular toe or one muscle group or something like that. So it's a little bit more generic.
Yes.
And that's part of accessibility, I think, too, for amputees. One thing I will say is you don't want to, if you do assist your amputees, you don't want to put your hands on their prosthesis, if at all possible, because you don't know what's going to happen if you do. You might move something really, and every little subtle movement they'll feel. Mm-hmm. And they're also really, really expensive. So you don't want to yank on something and then no. Often I'll teach, if most of your seniors in a chair, a lot of amputees will just, whether they can be in a chair or not, will just join the group in the chair. And then if they are able to do the pose without a chair, then they do it without a chair and you show them that.
Would it be fair to say, I really liked what you said was that they have to know that you have belief in them, that they can do this yoga class. Would you say it's fair to say that it's really more of a partnership between the amputee who knows far more about how to adapt for their particular amputation than probably the teacher does? And the teacher's just adding the yoga part of it. It seems to me it'd be more of a partnership than an actual teacher-student relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a partnership. My belief is that amputees, when they go through the rehabilitation process and get back into their lives, they're actually practicing yoga and mindfulness all the time. Again, because you have to think about what you're doing. When so many things that we do habitually, you can retrain your brain to do them habitually, but you're always going to be a little bit, as an amputee, you're always going to think a little bit more about certain actions and in certain environments. So for a yoga class, they're going to be using their brain a lot. So that's where you are in a collaborative experience. They're trusting you to know what you know about yoga. And I do know from working with amputees that they will seek out guidance on how to do their practice. But I think even at this point, like I said, I've been doing this forever, but I'm still experimenting because each person is new. And it also depends on what their history was like. If they were on a SWAT team before they lost a limb and then they go to take your class, a really gentle class might not be what they want or need. But maybe they just, I work with one guy who was a construction guy and he's really buff and fit, but he's had some major injuries and he needs the basics first so he can safely go to a regular yoga class. So that's often the case.
If someone wanted to get into this area, you have some teacher training available, and is it face-to-face or online or a combination? Or
I have found that the online is the best because then I can reach people from all over the world. Yeah, and set up time. So I usually have one for people like you. So I'll either do the day before or really early in the morning for those people. I usually do 2 per week online. And so, my last training, there were 2 people from the Midwest and the other person was in Myanmar. So, you just don't know. So I really like that approach. And then I have a person that I'm training to do more of the live trainings. And she's had tons of yoga experience like me, so I feel really good with her. And she's done a lot of adaptive yoga over the years. And I like to do live trainings, but I just honestly think that because there's so much material to learn, and it's such a learning curve for most of the people that take the training, the weekly sessions are better because they break it down, more digestible mini bites than trying to do it all in one weekend. And then, I don't mind doing a weekend at all, but I found that the online is easier for people.
I agree. So if people wanted to take your online class, would they go to your website to sign up? Is that the correct way to do it? Or
that's it. Yeah, it's just yogaforamputees.com. And there's also lots of resources there, videos and things like that are helpful. I get a lot of requests for guidance from different teachers, especially. And I set up a consultation because I need to know where their client is coming from. I need to know that client's background in terms of, injuries, pain level, all that stuff, because everything we do in the training is really helpful, but there's still the individual. So when it comes to somebody writing to me about an individual client, I just prefer that they take the training or do individual consultations so that we can really break it down and help them get the best out of their sessions with their amputee client.
You're also willing to do some consultations with individual yoga teachers, is that correct? Or would you prefer?
I do charge for it. So I do a really thorough intake form, and I do a thorough hours of preparation beforehand with videos and handouts, and
wow, okay,
so that they feel really prepared.
Yeah, no, that's great. I understand that. That would be wonderful. We talked about your book for Yoga for Amputees, which won't be out for a little while, which is too bad. But you do have another book, isn't that correct? That was more of your own journey. And you want to talk about that just a little bit?
It's called From the Roots, and there's a lot of tree imagery in there, being Celtic, Irish. We like our trees. And it's broken up into triptychs. So triptychs are basically 3 in 1, the theme of 3 in 1. So the idea of Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, the Om, and then the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, individual I and the ego, and then the id, all of those things. So there's that idea of the Trinity is so common in so many cultures. So I broke it up into a poem. It would be a poem, and then the story itself, and then there's either a prose or poem. And some people get really scared of the poetry idea, but actually those people end up loving that the most because it's so impactful. And so it dives pretty deep into the themes of what it's like to live with long-term illness in terms of, isolation and fear, pain, anxiety, blaming your body, blaming God, body image, boyfriends, all of it. How do you approach these things, and how do you keep coming back to your home? Your home is your highest self, right? Your eternal self, I think. But so it keeps going back to that place of, how do I get back home? How do I get back home? There's been a lot of shocks along the way, and it's because it started when I was so young. And in those days, the prognosis for the type of cancer I had in the 60s was, I think it was even 5% survival rate or something crazy like that. There have been tremendous side effects, but I do think that experience I had in my mind, that resilience, that meeting of body with spirit has been there for a really long time. So yoga just seemed like it was naturally going to happen. Let's put it that way.
How, if someone wanted, which sounds like really a fascinating book, if someone wanted to get a hold of that, is it on Amazon or? How
it is.
Oh, it is. Okay, great.
Yep. It's called From the Roots by Marsha T. Danzig. And then if they're interested in mudras, there's a little book for mudras for children called Yoga for Busy Little Hands. And actually, it's apparently been really helpful for people who work with adults with different physical and mental challenges. Mudras are another way in, I find, for some people, where the physical practice might be unavailable. Doing yoga, yoga mudra or something like that, or what is it, Jnana mudra, is something that can be accessible for a lot of people.
Given us lots of resources here. I'm going to give your contact details so people can get a hold of you, contact you if they want to. But is there anything that you would like to say before we conclude the interview that we haven't covered that you would like to talk to the listeners about?
I think the main thing is that we all have the capacity to embrace the fullness of ourselves. And I often find that people who come in the weakest bodies have become experts at it. Okay. And so it really helps all of us to have great reverence for those who have a more challenged physical life, and to really see beyond the surface, to really, because that could be us someday or any day. So I think it behooves all of us to live from our best, highest essence, if you will, our highest, purest, most divine inspiration on a daily basis, and absolutely to create beauty every day. It's really that important, because when you don't have it, you know when you don't have it.
Thank you so much. All right, if any of you would like to explore a little bit more about what Marsha said or is doing, her email address is yogacalm@msn.com, and her website is www.yogaforamputees.com. Facebook, Instagram are also Yoga for Amputees, and her LinkedIn is Marsha Therese Danzig, which is all one word. And there's also a YouTube, but it goes on, and so I'll just put that in the show.
I would just go to the website and click on the symbol.
Okay, that's good too. Yeah, go to the website if you want the YouTube. So thank you so much, Marsha. It's really great to talk to you, and I really love your knowledge and ability to really get your knowledge across. It's a gift to be able to do that. So thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you so much for asking, and I hope that everybody who's listening gets the opportunity to share yoga with amputees. For sure. It's a good learning process.
Thank you for that wonderful interview. If you would like to be a guest on Changing the Face of Yoga, please go to my website, www.yogalightness.com.au, and under the Changing the Face of Yoga tab, you can complete Be Our Guest form. After reviewing the form and finding it applicable to this podcast, we will send you a link to schedule an interview. Please download, review, and tell your friends of any podcasts that are of interest to you and to them. If you would like to contact me, send an email to info@yogalightness.com.au. And thank you for listening to Changing the Face of Yoga.